Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, episode number 109, all about appreciative inquiry in higher education. We're talking with Joan McArthur-Blair and Jeanie Cockell, who are consulting partners who are focused all in on that, have wrote two great books on this topic, and just really am glad that we got the time here to talk through everything for the podcast. So definitely check out their work in the show notes. Definitely check out the merch store as the holidays approach. A lot of cool stuff there to grab, and definitely appreciate the support there as always. And with all of that, after this brief message from our sponsor, this is episode number 109, focused on appreciative inquiry in higher education. This episode is sponsored by Degree.me, a one-stop college research tool for students. If you work for a college or university, you'll want to learn all about their ability to connect you with the right students at a budget-friendly price. To find out more, please visit degree.me/HEG. All right, so I am super excited to have both of you on. It's always neat when I have two guests just to get two different perspectives on the same episode, but kind of focusing on one topic that I'm super excited to explore of appreciative inquiry, kind of in the higher ed context. So yeah, we'll get right to it. If we want to just kick us off as we usually do with introductions in your professional journeys of how you got to be where you are today. So we'll start with you, Jeanie, and then go over to Joan.
Great. Well, I'm very excited that currently, and for the last 20 years, I've been a private consultant, and most of our clients are higher education institutions. And that was built on years as a math teacher and a chair and a dean in actually a higher education institution before that. So it's a world I love.
And this is Joan, and I work with Jeanie. We work together in our business, and for me, education is a vocation. You know, I have been involved in education all my life, and like Jeanie, come to consulting out of 30 plus years in higher education, from faculty to president, and we think appreciative inquiry fits so profoundly within the kind of goals of higher education. So we're really excited to be with you this morning, Dustin.
Yeah. Good stuff. So, we'll get into the meat of it here. But before we go any further, just make sure everybody understands, because sometimes it's like that bias of like, oh, well, I know what it is. I'm sure everybody else does. But if you just want to give, we'll go with you on this one, Jeanie, just briefly, if you want to give an explanation of what appreciative inquiry is.
Oh, I'd be happy to do that. Basically, appreciative inquiry is a way of looking at the world and using tools to make changes in the world for a positive intent. The appreciative is really to value what is already going on and inquire into that and find out more about what's really valuable that's going on in any situation. And it's also to increase that value through the appreciative stance and the way of inquiring and asking great questions. And it's also, especially in these times where we're looking at a lot of systemic issues going on, it's also to be fully aware. So don't just focus on the positive, but also look at what's wrong in the world in order to refocus and saying, use an appreciative inquiry to say, how is it we can inquire and advocate for change, social justice change, through the lens of appreciative inquiry by being full aware, valuing what we're doing well to make those changes. So that's it, appreciative inquiry in a nutshell.
Gotcha. And I think it may come up just as like a shorthand and just sort of like AI, which is like, in my head, it's like, oh, it's like the other AI, not artificial intelligence. But yeah, so I'm sure that maybe that'll be just a shorthand to make sure that people don't get confused, but AI as an appreciative inquiry. Because I know this resonates with me a lot just because I love sort of the school of thought of like positive psychology and, just that viewpoint on the world. And I guess just as like a quick clarifying point, do you see those as kind of like, because I'm sure maybe people are a little bit familiar with like positive psychology. It's just a broader school of thought. So do you feel like this is sort of like a manifestation of that in just a particular context?
Well, there's a real connection between appreciative inquiry and positive psychology and kind of its other theoretical basis. social construction, where we really create the organizations that we work in relationship to each other. So you're absolutely right, Dustin. There's a real relationship between positive psychology, social construction, and appreciative inquiry.
And strengths-based leadership, the work that's being done around, looking at strengths. So a lot of things are related to this surfacing of people's wisdom to see what is already successful and celebrated and build on it, and really recognizing strengths. So there's lots of things that are wonderfully interconnected in that.
And when David Cooper-Ryder started appreciative inquiry, David Cooper-Ryder and others as well started appreciative inquiry in the early 80s, there was that strong kind of seeking other kinds of theories that could inform the new theory of appreciative inquiry. And so your instinct is right. There's a real link between positive psychology in particular and appreciative inquiry.
And positive education. Joan and I were part of a facilitator group which led 900 people from how many countries, Joan? I think 18 or 20 or something like around the world a couple of years ago. And it was actually a blend between Martin Seligman's working with David Cooper-Ryder to hold an appreciative inquiry huge summit, as I said, a really big summit, in order to explore how positive education, in other words, positive psychology and education, is thriving in the world, and so that we could connect people all around the world to what they're doing and what more we could be doing in positive education. So I think that's a really good example of how the worlds connect between appreciative inquiry and positive psychology and education.
Yeah. Well, because, I mean, it's always just for me sometimes like, connecting the dots that people might have a point of reference to, and it sort of just helps to, know, contextualize things. But and I guess just kind of zooming in a little bit, because I'm sure there's a myriad of different kind of use cases for this philosophy, and just how it informs different organizations, everything. But obviously we'll focus on higher education. So we'll go to you on this one first, Joan. So how do you see this concept kind of applying and showing up in higher education specifically?
Well, I think there's so many ways in which appreciative inquiry is being used in higher education. It's being used in the classroom as appreciative pedagogy that focuses on the strengths of learners and the ways in which learners show up in class and how strengths can be amplified through the curriculum. It's showing up in massive strategic planning work, and that's something that Jeanie and I do a fair bit with universities and colleges, where the universities want to bring the entire organization together, or the entire organization and the community together, to ask that question, what might we be in the future? And so it's used a tremendous amount for strategic planning in higher education. It's used in team development and organizational development in other ways as well, to look at the ways in which divisions and departments can utilize their strength. And also is used as a powerful force for kind of generative leadership, the ways in which leaders might consider the questions they ask and how those questions can add to the possibilities inside of an organization. And so right across the organization, it's being used in all different kinds of ways. From kind of the tool of strategic planning to the much more kind of, Jeanie mentioned this at the beginning, this notion of kind of being appreciative inquiry. How can I increase in value what I see right in front of me and fan the flame to get more of that inside the organization?
Well, yeah. And it just makes me think, like, within the higher ed context, just like, I think, when people encounter this, I know, and it's kind of just speaking from my experience specifically, but imagine this would be the case for a lot of folks. Like, this just makes so much sense, but I think unfortunately, especially in like American society, it is kind of a rugged individualism and just kind of like, we don't often, I think, encounter spaces where it is so kind of affirmative and strengths-based and all these kind of things. But once you learn more about like just this whole philosophy, it's like, it just resonates and makes so much sense. And I think, as students are entering college and just finding themselves and building their communities and networks and, all those sort of things, like, it's just so powerful. And, it definitely has been something for me. Like, I've, encountered it through leadership courses in undergrad, and then took positive psychology courses in graduate school within the kind of the context of higher ed. And, It really does. Just kind of inform daily practice. But then even, like you said, it can kind of like really zoom out and just be like, okay, well, we're going to utilize this mindset and questioning and just sort of framework to also like, strategically plan, maybe like decades into the future for an entire institution that's already existed for hundreds of years, or like it can be either like super micro or super macro. It has applications for sure on kind of either side.
Yeah, and also with higher education institutions right now going through all sorts of chaos and, the COVID experience, and then also the notions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. All of those can be really informed by appreciative inquiry. So right now, it's like really rich.
And I think that if there was ever a moment for appreciative inquiry in higher education, I think it might be now. Mm-hmm. I think there's some real yearning to kind of unravel exactly what you were talking about kind of that, to look more at the collective ways in which people can support each other, and really kind of begin to answer that quintessential thing that higher education is about. Higher education is about hope. It's about fostering dreams for every learner that comes through the door. And it also should be about fostering hope for the people who work inside it. So I think if there was ever a time where appreciative inquiry can find its home in higher education, it would be now. There's a lot going on that are very complicated conversations. What does it mean to force entire institutions online and then bring them back face to face, and then out they go online again? And in the midst of trying to work really deeply, as Jeanie said, about diversity, equity, inclusion.
And that seems to show up the last few times, especially we've been doing summits with a faculty of whatever, education perhaps, that's one example, where they wanted to go back to their original culture. Well, there's not really going back anymore, but what that the underpinning of that going back to the culture is what's showing up is this diversity and the tensions that it can include. And so people come together to not ignore what's happening, but to use appreciative inquiry to saying, how is it we've got this diversity and difference and we're working together now, and how can we be doing that even better than what we are grounding ourselves in? So it's a complex time in the world, and appreciative inquiry works really well with complex times. And that, in fact, David Cooperrider has just come out with an added rung to the different rungs he talks about in appreciative inquiry, the lowest rung being the easiest, which is the extraordinary, which is kind of where he started out in working with the Cleveland Clinic, right, which is an extraordinary institution. And then the next rung is, well, if you can do it with the extraordinary, how about just with the ordinary, which is a little more challenging, but still it's a wonderful place to be. And then the top, which he's just added based on reading our latest book, which is Building Resilience with Appreciative Inquiry, which he wrote the foreword to. After reading our book, he said there's another rung, and that's the tragic, that's the challenging, that's that. He calls it the tragic. We call it the state of despair in our resilience book. So, appreciative inquiry is always growing. This is just in the recent couple of years. So that's a wonderful world to be in, that everybody can contribute to the growth of appreciative inquiry.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things of kind of looking at something and not being like, oh, well, that theory doesn't apply, so it must be wrong. It's like, no, it kind of evolves, with the time. Like, it's not, it's not saying that it's like not worthy. It's kind of just like, it kind of is evolving with like, I think certainly like it is like a globally shared experience of trauma right now. And it's just sort of like, oh yeah, I mean, this is like especially relevant, and just, how can we evolve this to sort of, kind of meet that challenge. But, I think just, one last piece on the kind of the higher ed context, because I think we'll continue this conversation, sort of my other questions that I wanted to go through, but like, the idea of like higher ed having that like existential crisis, just like, if none of this was going on with like global pandemics and remote learning and everything, it was just like still a trend line of like people kind of doubting the value of a degree and like how much it cost and just sort of, those sort of things. So having to like rebuild those relationships sometimes of like, this is relevant, this is why it's valuable, and this is, why it's worth the investment, and those sort of things, being able to, meet with community stakeholders and students and anybody and everybody really, and make sure that there's a really, I don't know, like a strong foundation, because it can obviously like just get into like kind of devolve. And, if you don't kind of have like a strong mindset, like to kind of, manage conversations and like, those sort of things, like it's just going to devolve into like finger pointing of like, well, you keep raising tuition. I was like, well, you keep, blah, 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 blah. Like, it's just going to like, just, you have to kind of, just navigate those with a little bit more of a deft hand, and, appreciative inquiry kind of, works to help with that. So I guess, in this next question, we can kind of take it with a little bit more of like maybe an action focused lens of just, like this, the concept of appreciative inquiry being, really like embodied in a culture, kind of like the day to day, or just, how things actually happen. So I think we've talked a lot about kind of the values and the outcomes and kind of the relevance, but then like, how do you, see this kind of working to be really embodied in an organization's culture? And we'll start with you on this one, Jeanie.
Well, I think it can be anywhere from, when you're in a department meeting, say, starting off with, well, since we last met, what are some of the things that have worked well in your world? Then share some of those together, and you're inquiring and you're asking about what's working. And so therefore people are sharing ideas that then they go, oh, I think I could try that too. Or here's my idea of what I've done based on a success I've had in the last month. And so that just becomes part of the culture, if that's just part of the regular way a meeting is started, for example.
And I think all those small ways in which appreciative inquiry can be embedded in the way people ask a question. I many years ago now, I had an opportunity to work with a president in the middle of quite a deep crisis. And so we would meet in a crisis meeting every morning about 6:30. And always her first questions were about, what have we done well since yesterday in managing this crisis? And what that did was set us all up in the room to kind of long to do more, and it's that fundamental notion of appreciative inquiry. What has value? What more might we do? Such a simple concept, really, appreciative inquiry. It's not easy to practice in the everyday, but I think that there's ways in which leaders can embody this notion of to appreciate what is, to inquire into what might be, in kind of the everyday of the organization, right across the spectrum. And then it starts to kind of infect, and it kind of, works in some ways as an antidote to some of the discouragement that sometimes people feel in higher education, particularly at the moment you mentioned this about, people questioning the value of higher education, questioning, the cost of higher education, questioning how we're able to deliver it at this moment in time. And I think it speaks to seeking to understand the fundamental tenets of higher education, which are about the access to deep understanding of knowledge. It doesn't matter whether you're studying mechanics or philosophy. It's that deep understanding of something that higher education provides. And so appreciative inquiry kind of finds its way to buddy right up against that and fan the flame of that, I think, in powerful ways.
And an example is, with the COVID crisis, and suddenly things are having to be done predominantly virtually. And, that's been going on in higher ed for a while. Now it's essential. So those who've been resisting are no longer able to resist, because that's the only way available sometimes. And the opportunity is people starting to see the opportunity that provides. Joan and I have been in that same situation. We've had to redesign some of our coursework and training and so on, because instead of physically traveling to where that would be done, we are now doing it from home. And it's amazing how our participants are saying things like, oh, I only wanted to face-to-face and I was disappointed when I had to do this virtually. And I can't believe how profound this learning is. So that kind of opportunity is huge. And when you have an appreciative culture, it's easier to say, well, this is a problem. I don't want to do this, but, well, how can I open my eyes to what is possible here? What this is as an opportunity.
Yeah. And I think it's such interesting things, because I think, how this actually gets embodied, like, I think there's certainly, like probably a spectrum of people who are like, either just like avoidant or aloof, like they're not doing it, and they're just like not making the time for it, but they're gonna, I think, warm up to it pretty easily once you maybe start to integrate it into these like smaller ways, and it really starts to build up people's kind of emotional capacity to be more hopeful and more optimistic. But yeah, and that idea of kind of people being like resistant, because I think some people would be just like actively dismissive of saying like that's not a valuable use of time. You've got to just like get things done, just be transactional, and then move on. But because I think what's also like kind of sort of swirling for me in all this is especially like kind of builds to kind of my next question as well. But like during this current moment as well, like there's such a need for communication with constituents and stakeholders, and like trying to bring people together and be kind of like diplomatic and respectful, and that and like hearing people's stories and hearing what they're actually feeling, and how things are impacting them. And it obviously is not going to serve any institutional leaders very well to be kind of like avoidant or dismissive of that, and just kind of like, well, we're just going to like put out press statements about whether we're open or we're remote, or these sort of things. Like I think it's certainly valuable to do that, but also like maybe you need to like again, it's as much as where my brain always goes is like, as much as I kind of have the experience with, it's just like for college or university, doing a town hall or doing some sort of like engaging webinar or whatever to speak about what's going on, hear firsthand from people, respond to them, and show them that they're heard and that they're appreciated, and just kind of understand better what they're experiencing versus like making assumptions, or again, just like not thinking that is like time well spent.
And I think that it goes back to saying right at the beginning, you asked about the definition of appreciative inquiry, and I think that notion that you're actually powerfully getting at is one of the definitions of appreciate is not just to increase in value or to value what is, but also to be fully aware, to actually stand in kind of the storm of how people are feeling at different moments in time when things happen inside institutions, and allowing that to exist, and then kind of saying, if that exists, how might we use our influence to create a future together? And it opens the door from kind of issue to action. And you don't want to say that blithely, because some issues are enormous and they're not going to go away because they're huge and systemic. But it begins to chip away at some of those larger issues, and so there's that opportunity, as you say, for people to be able to express some of the anxiety of what is going on for them, but also to ask that question: what might we do now that we understand that?
Yeah, and we always call appreciative inquiry a practice, because it's not something that you get perfect. You have to keep practicing it. And I think it's the leadership. And when we use the term leadership, we mean anybody who's moving things along positively in the world. So it could be in the classroom, it could be as a department chair, it could be as a student leadership, student in the classroom, anywhere higher, the higher in the hierarchy, or the bottom line, that people are making positive changes in their world because they're practicing appreciative inquiry. And as I think we've already used the term, we try to infect an organization with appreciative inquiry, so that people don't even know that that's happening, because people who are passionate about it are simply living in it. They're not going around saying, "Oh, we've got to do appreciative inquiry." They're simply taking that practice of looking at things, being curious, and appreciating what is and what more could be done, both the good and the bad, and let's make it better, whatever it is. So.
I
Right.
just wanted to add something to what Jeannie just said before we go on to the next question. And I think that one of the things that this process allows for people is I can list the things that are wrong on any given day. But by listing those things that are wrong, I actually have almost eliminated my agency to do anything. But when I seek to understand what might be possible within those issues, when I seek to understand, is there a place inside the organization that this issue is being answered, being practiced in a positive way? Is there a small thing that I might do? I immediately begin to take back my own agency no matter where I am inside an organization. And that's very powerful for people, because in that agency is hope. And in that agency is understanding there's a possibility for positive change inside an organization.
And that notion of agency, when we do, a formal process of appreciative inquiry, no matter how small or big, through the D's, discover, dream, and design, and live the destiny and deliver it. That notion of designing actions is also really key. Appreciative inquiry in that form is a tool to actually make things happen. And people make commitments. They offer things to each other in order to help each other in those actions that are planned to move forward. And they have requests, they request each other. So it's a really collaborative, committed way of actually taking the cycle through and then living those actions and looking at them, rediscovering, well, what did we do well? What else could we be doing? And so on. So there's that whole cycle. And again, that becomes part of the culture, is to just re-ask and dream and redesign and then continue to deliver.
And I'll give you a really practical example. Jeanie and I were working with a large private university in the States doing a really big strategic planning process. And they undertook to include everybody in the organization, and people from the community and alumni and the board of trustees and so on. In the middle of right at the end, almost end of the strategic planning process, the president decided to move on to someplace else. And so they were kind of left with this almost finished strategic plan. And sometimes in organizations, then, the trustees kind of go, okay, should we wait now for a new president? What should we do? The organization said to the trustees, let's ask an appreciative question. From all of these strategies, what might we do to move the organization forward that is powerful as you seek a new president and CEO for the organization? And so it really gets at what Jeanie was saying about the kind of practice of appreciative inquiry. The daily practice of it, the generative question of it, allows you to use things even when something's been derailed that you've been working on for months. So
yeah. I mean, all really good stuff. I mean, it just, because I think I'll again try to build this towards the next question, because I feel like this is going to really be another kind of knockout punch here, just to really bring this home for people. Is just what you're saying too, is within these things, it's not trying to ignore or dismiss the problems or the gaps or any of those sort of things. It's just almost kind of appreciating where you are with that and recognizing the opportunities for growth and improvement and those sort of things. So I think and it just so much being a practice and a habit, and I mean there's so much there of an organization keeping each other honest and really celebrating those moments where good questions were asked, or just really embodying this value. But and certainly with all of that being said, of you're not trying to ignore anything that's wrong or anything that's negative, and trying to just really build that capacity towards more optimism and more just the capacity for change and improvement and everything. I imagine a lot of people hearing this might say okay, that's all sounds great, but things are just very unpredictable right now and disrupted and all of that. So I think we've kind of alluded to this quite a bit, and whatever way that you want to take it, just to emphasize something again, or just continue to flesh it out. But what makes this concept especially relevant right now? And we'll start with you, Joan, on this one.
Well, I think what makes it particularly relevant right now is a lot of organizations are saying, how does our, in the big scale, how does our strategic planning stand up to this kind of environment at the moment? And what more might we build inside of that? And so I think there are moments to kind of reflect on where an organization was going, and then think about how they can add to that. So then the big scale. But I think often within, these kinds of times, I mean, everyone has had to pivot because of this pandemic. They've had to work from home. Their kids are not necessarily going to school regularly. It's been a time of chaos. And I think within times of chaos, the being appreciative inquiry, bringing appreciative inquiry home is really powerful. And asking those questions. What is it that I can do on this day to amplify what is positive inside the organization? What small thing might I do? What questions can I ask that move us forward within this chaos? And so I think, David Cooperrider and many other appreciative inquiry practitioners, including Jeanie and I, always think that underneath every problem is a simple yearning. And so as we express those problems like chaos, what is it we seek to create? And are there places inside the organization where that's getting created that we could enable? Do we need to begin at the beginning and say, how can we create something positive out of this chaos? And there's been so many positive things, in the most simplest way. Both Jeanie and I are not youngsters, and yet we have fully embraced living and working in an online environment and have learned an enormous amount. And we look at that as an incredible opportunity. So I think the being AI is where I'd say is powerful at the moment within the chaos. What can I appreciate today? What might I be curious about?
And I want to give a real life example. This morning, I was co-facilitating an appreciative inquiry with a small group that came out of that World Positive Education Accelerator in 2018. And there are positive educators who have a positive psychology background. There's appreciative inquiry practitioners. We're an interesting mix because we don't always actually engage in quite the same way. So it's a kind of really interesting opportunity. And this morning we did an appreciative inquiry because we've done so much work getting out into the world. Some tips for parents to be resilient through this challenging time. What do they do? Because many of them are having to spend a lot of time actually helping their kids learn online and all that. And so, the main person who has our Zoom link didn't have breakout rooms, and I'm facilitating. I've said, well, I don't see where your thing says, because she made me host, where it says breakout rooms, and I don't see it here. And she realized I've never used breakout rooms. So we all just kind of went with the flow and laughed and went out of one room into the other. I set up one on my own Zoom account so I could get breakout rooms. And next week we're going to do the second part of it, because we only got so far in this first inquiry into investigating this fabulous group on resilience for parents and how well it's been working. And we're going to carry that on next week. And hopefully we'll have breakout rooms. So I think it's that ability to laugh and appreciate and be vulnerable and supportive of one another for what it is that we're doing right now in this chaotic time.
And I think there is that in appreciative inquiry, that notion of curiosity and vulnerability. We seek to understand what has value, and by doing so, we identify for ourselves what we deeply care about. And then we say, what more might we do? What are we curious about? And so I think that this is a time of doing exactly that over and over again every day, as we deal with the ebb and flow of the pandemic, as we deal with being in online environments, as we deal with some of the huge issues in higher education, like the digital divide that have become so apparent, like issues of poverty and socioeconomic issues that are impacting people in ways that were not as visible when they were on campus. And so I think there are those moments where appreciative inquiry kind of lets us reside in grace and begin anew every moment.
Yeah. I mean, it just, there's so much, I guess, like swirling around. I think I guess the one thing that, like, through all that of just like, yeah, like it kind of being, amidst all the chaos, like it's especially relevant, like, because I think it's an interesting thing of like, I think that like all the noise and the chaos of what's going on and kind of just like, you have to sit at home and like doom scrolling on my phone. It's kind of like allowed for me to kind of try to find some like serenity in all the noise, where it's just like, asking those questions of myself even, and allowing to kind of be like, you know what? Yeah, I want to support these organizations, and I know we're doing good work that I want to support, and take that time even now, especially so because, it's that much more needed. And it, just in kind of the day to day, sometimes just overlooking those things. And I think, stuff like this can, I guess, kind of fall in that bucket of just people kind of being, yeah, again, just sort of aloof probably. And, that they would say like, oh yeah, no, yeah. I mean, I would want that, or that is important to me, but they just don't, maybe make the time for it. But it is certainly, again, just to echo it again, I feel like it's just like such an important habit to kind of ingrain. But, with that, I guess like that is something that I'd want to make sure that we're kind of emphasizing here a lot, is like advice that you would give someone trying to incorporate, AI into their work, into their life. So, again, whatever kind of resonates or kind of comes up for either of you, I'll start with you on this one, Jeanie.
Well, first of all, read our book on appreciative inquiry in higher education, The Transformative Force. I mean, it really is the only book out there that is focused so much on education, especially higher education. And so we found it is, soon people read it and they start to go, wow, I could do it here, I could do it there, I could do it this. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of other resources, because start with that book. You could move to the Building Resilience with Appreciative Inquiry, which is the other book. And there's lots of resources in both those books to go further reading. When I got involved in hearing about Appreciative Inquiry, I just went out and read everything I could, and then just tried it, right? Try it from the simplest thing to say, okay, next time I'm having a conversation with that difficult person, I'm going to start by asking them something which will actually generate hope for them. I'm going to look at something that they have, even a small strength that I don't often see, and just notice it and bring it forward and ask a question that might move us forward rather than in the defensive.
And I always want to amplify what Jeanie said, is just to begin where you can. Maybe you are a department head trying to create a little plan for what's going on right now in your department's world, or in your division's world, or your school's world, and just begin, right? By asking that question, what are we doing well here? What are we proud of at the moment? And what do you think we might do in the next couple of months to really take care of both our students and ourselves and the organization? And so I agree with Jeanie. Just begin. Think about the way you ask questions. Think about, there's lots of resources. Jeanie named a couple, both of our books, but also the Cooper Ryder Center for Appreciative Inquiry at Champlain College in the United States, the Center for Appreciative Inquiry out of Las Vegas, and the Cooper Ryder Center in particular has an incredible number of resources online for people who want to begin to use appreciative inquiry, from what is it to tools to use it, and so on. And many of those tools you can also find in our book. But
it takes some training. Both centers, both the Cooper Ryder Center for Appreciative Inquiry and the Center for Appreciative Inquiry itself, are wonderful places to sign up for something that you'll get some training in appreciative inquiry. That's, people just can't believe how that shifts how they look at the world, many of them, or reinforces how they look in the world. And they're glad that there are other people in the world who look for the best of what is and what's working and the strengths. So yeah, there's lots of ways to continue the journey of deepening a practice of appreciative inquiry.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, I kind of wanted to emphasize, because I feel like it's come up a bit, and you recognize too, like kind of there being more leaders than just like the president of a higher ed institution. It can be, oh, you're the head of a department, you're just like the head of a team, anything like that. Like, I think it's so valuable for that leader to kind of be modeling the way with this sort of, questioning and just sort of framing of things. But then certainly, because I feel like I'm always kind of like, the optimistic kind of energetic one that's always like, willing to kind of celebrate what we're doing well, and, wanting to, give that its due attention and everything. So it's like, I've always just relished like, yeah, I'm like the positive guy, like on the team, yeah. Even if everybody else is like kind of curmudgeon-y or whatever. It's like, yeah, I mean, I've never led a team per se, but like, I think I've maybe helped to lead teams more towards kind of even just towards the center of just like, yeah, sure. We could just sit here and like complain and, just, talk about how awful things are. But then it's like, okay, well, what can we do about that? Or what? And what's like fascinating is that sometimes people like they can't give any clear guidance on like, okay, yeah, sure, you don't like how training is, like, how should we do it differently? And they're just like, at a loss and kind of just repeating, whatever kind of gripes they have or something. But, I don't know. That's always just been the mindset. And I think it's, it's especially relevant to leaders of teams, but absolutely, anybody should feel empowered to, just take up that mantle and kind of, lead the charge. But, and I guess, again, just perfect segue here, but because I want to make sure we gave time to like talk through resources and things, and you already gave, just a treasure trove of good stuff there. We'll link out to all that in the show notes. But anything else? Like, I'm almost curious if maybe there's like podcasts out there or like something else that you feel like would be relevant here that you'd want to recommend.
Before we go there, I think Dustin, you just touched on something that was so powerful, and just quickly, I know we're running to our time limit, but as an influencer, you kind of described yourself as an influencer. And I think this is a real place for people to practice appreciative inquiry as the influencer in the group, to kind of help people understand that maybe there's a different lens at which they can look through things.
I was going to emphasize that too, Dustin, that notion of, many times I've been in a team, and with an appreciative mindset, I've influenced the team, not being the leader of the team, by, as you were describing, just the kind of questions you ask to kind of disrupt where, the normal route of complaining about something, just disrupt that a bit. And I think as teachers and professors and all instructors, I think, you can do things like ask students to tell stories in pairs with each other about when they've really learned well, when has it been exciting and energizing, and to just set the tone of learning, of like excitement, instead of learning, oh my goodness, I have to take this course, right? And by sharing those stories and ideas, the instructor gets a sense from them of what it is that will really be great for the instructor to do in order to have another experience for them of exciting, wonderful learning. So,
and you were asking about resources. The Appreciative Inquiry group of practitioners around the world is an incredibly giving community. And so there are ways in which people can join that community because they're curious about appreciative inquiry. And so there's lots of free webinars always going on out of the Cooper Ryder Center or out of the Center for Appreciative Inquiry in Vegas. Jeanie and I's website, there's lots of resources there. And one of the things that's powerful about this community, and David started this at the very beginning, he really wanted appreciative inquiry to grow. And so he invited the world to participate in it, to write on it, to expand the knowledge, to expand the understanding. And because of that appreciative inquiry in the community, people are really supportive of each other. And so I would say one of the ways to start, and one of the great resources, is each other in that community, to reach out to somebody and say, hey, I want to try this. Can I spend 5 minutes with you? So, there's lots of places people can go.
And one of the things that through the Cooper Ryder Center you can find as a resource is the International Journal on Appreciative Inquiry. It's called the AI Practitioner. And Joan and I guest edited the one coming out in November, which is next week, which is going to be exciting. It's the topic. It always has a topic. Oh, actually, no, sometimes there's open journals, but it has the topic of hope in times of despair. This one coming up next week.
And so people are writing on how they've used appreciative inquiry to generate hope in times of despair.
And through COVID.
And through this particular...
It's very powerful. Some of the articles are amazing.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Well, then, certainly hope, optimism, it's my jam. Just kind of consider myself, eternal optimist for sure. So we always do like to end the episodes on an optimistic note. So we'll kind of take our cues from that very work that you've just been doing on that publication. So just briefly, and we'll start with you on this one, Joan, just what are you looking forward to with this work that you'd want to share with everybody in the audience?
Well, I think that the thing that I'm looking forward to is just continuing to deepen the practice of appreciative inquiry in so many ways in my personal life and in my professional life. Because appreciative inquiry keeps growing. Jeanie and I are working on a lot of work in appreciative inquiry in the times of the tragic, in very complex situations. And there's real growth there where people are suffering and want ways to have conversations around huge and systemic issues. And so I'm really looking forward to that work expanding over time. I'm always looking forward in higher education to hearing the stories of how organizations have used appreciative inquiry to uplift the work that they're doing.
And I'll just add on to that, and I'm really looking forward to continuing to work virtually. It's so exciting to connect with people worldwide. People don't have travel costs anymore. They come onto these webinars and interactions, learning interactions, and learn together, and the connections globally and the feelings they have of being connected globally through this COVID crisis and beyond. I hope it goes beyond, because people really have so much to share around the world about living appreciative inquiry.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I've connected with people for this podcast all over the place, and it's just incredible, to have these conversations, and so appreciative of this one as well, and all that you all shared, and have ways to connect with you all and your work in the show notes, as well as everything else that you mentioned as usual. But just thank you so much, both of you, for your time, and it's just such great stuff.
Thanks so much, Dustin. It's been great spending time with you.
It's fabulous meeting somebody like you, Dustin, who is so into this. Yay!
Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Higher Ed Geek podcast.